Video game subscriptions are an evil waste of your money and you should cancel all of them. Or should you? We're going to be talking about all that and more, but first, coffee. Now the coffee we're drinking today is an Ethiopian Sidamo. I'm going to give you a quick look at these beans. It is a dark roast and apparently these are washed coffee beans. What we really want to talk about today is video game subscriptions, and not just video game subscriptions, but subscriptions in general. Before, when you only had like one subscription service, you only really had to think about how much money you were spending on that one thing. But then now that everything is on a subscription, it's like you've got your Netflix subscription, you've got your like YouTube ad-free subscription, you've got your video game subscription, you've got all these subscriptions that just sort of pile up, even just things for like getting things delivered to your house that's on a subscription just so that you can get, you know, the discount for the free delivery. Actually, this is a few too many beans. I'm actually going to dose this at around 14 grams, 14 on the money. So the reasoning for canceling subscriptions was really just, you know, when you realize how much you're spending, you're like, actually, this is more money than I thought I actually was spending. And so you realize, okay, maybe now is the time to cancel those subscriptions. Going to put 14 grams of this Ethiopian Sidamo dark roasted coffee in here. As you can see, I'm actually using weighing scales now and actually figuring out exactly how much I've got. By the way, this is a weighing scale that goes down to 1/10 of a gram, so hopefully it's fairly accurate. At least I can figure out whether I'm closer to 15 grams or closer to 13 grams or closer to 15 grams. Put the handle on here and let's grind! So I started canceling all of my subscriptions, and it's mostly because for the past few years I've been reading a large number of books about, you know, just improving your life, improving your finances, getting set up for the future. And I was like, you know, a lot of these subscriptions I don't really need. And when I started to look at the ones I was paying for, one of the biggest, most expensive ones was the PlayStation one. Basically, I wasn't playing any of those games on my PlayStation. I was still turning on my PlayStation and playing the same old fighting games that I always play. Maybe sometimes dipping into a few of the like retro catalog things and they're going, oh wow, now I can still play this super old game that I used to play years ago on my PlayStation. And you know, the price is not unreasonable. It's like, okay, for some number of like, I don't know, it's like $60 a year, but you can go as much as like over $100 a year. There are a number of different tiers. But you know, for the ability and convenience of playing super old games on my PS5 and not having to like get out an old console and, you know, a CRT TV with analog composite cables just to play it, or to set up a FrameMeister or one of those devices. For the convenience, I felt like this is not too bad. But the subscriptions were piling up, and I was like, wait a minute, if I have this much money going out into subscriptions, I could actually, like, that is actually a large sum of money that I could be putting into other things, like, you know, saving up for a holiday that I want to take with my family, or, you know, investing and stuff. That's a whole other topic. But then I started to realize that it's not really about the waste of the money when it comes to the subscription. I started to realize that actually, in a way, I think I'm enjoying my games more without the subscription. It's not just about games on subscription. It's about having a large number of games. And then when it goes beyond that, it's not just having a large number of games on subscription and then having a large number of games on your Steam library. It goes to having games just be available completely for free. And how does that affect how much you actually enjoy them? Now, I'm not saying that games should cost a large amount of money. And the fact that we have systems to be able to play various games at either little or completely free, you know, no cost, I think that is fantastic. There are a number of provisos that come with it, and obviously what other game companies kind of like hooking you on and getting you addicted to just because you want to play games for free. That's a part of this discussion as well. By not having a subscription, I felt like I was freed from the need to have everything. Because it's not just a subscription to a large game catalog. It's like the feeling that you have a subscription to every game ever made, every piece of music ever created. And it's like, I want YouTube. I need to be able to watch every video ever filmed, or I want to watch every movie ever made. And so the real issue with subscriptions isn't just that this subscription is evil. It's just that the fact that everything is spread out into separate subscriptions, and so really you have no choice but to be subscribed to all of them so that you can have access to every movie because they're dotted around the different subscription services. That's where it's starting to become a real problem. So I started canceling my subscriptions, and I felt like probably one of the main advantages was that I actually kind of had to choose what I wanted to play and what I wanted to get involved in. And as a result, I also started to feel like I had been freed from the sort of pain of needing to have everything all the time. I felt like by selecting various things, I felt really proud of myself for getting this inner peace, reaching this inner level of peace where I don't have to, always chase having stuff that ultimately I can't use anyway. Because one of the actual things that we're limited on that we don't really measure very often is the amount of time that we have. What we measure too often, I think, is the amount of money we have. Or like, if we have the money and we can afford it, we should have it. And actually, that can be it can have the opposite result to what you're trying to get to. I feel like you're always chasing things, thinking you've got all of this time that you'll have to play these games, but ultimately, you don't actually have time to play all of them, but you do feel like you need to have access to all of them just in case. And this is something that it feels like, even if it wasn't done intentionally, the industry has created this feeling of needing to have everything all the time. And I'm not just talking about new games, I'm actually talking about retro games as well. And although I feel very strongly that, video games should absolutely be preserved and protected because there are so many fantastic experiences that would be a tragedy to have, lost just because of some technicality with a console not being compatible with hardware in the future or something like that. I feel like it's really important to preserve these things, but at the same time, video game preservation itself is kind of used as a way to make you fear not having something, and so you start looking for ways to be able to access them all the time. Maybe you try to get a subscription service set up so that you can access every possible game ever made, but then other people go the emulation route, and they're just like, well, because of video game preservation, it's really important that I download every ROM on Earth and have access to every game ever made. And absolutely, I believe that video games should be protected, but I'm not 100% sure that it really benefits every single person on Earth to have every single game ever made. That said, I do feel that way about music. So it's kind of not a double-edged sword, but it's kind of a double standard. I'm like, well, it's just a tragedy if there's music out there that we don't have access to. And really what I'm thinking about is especially classical music, but even just classic pieces of music that you feel like everyone should know about. I feel like it's really difficult because on the one hand, it is information and it is culture and it is something that everyone should be able to have access to. But at the same time, what does it do to you mentally to feel like you need to have everything all the time? All right, did that in pretty much on the money between 3.5 and 4 minutes and got 210 mils out. Hopefully this will be exactly the right concentration of this Ethiopian Sidamo coffee. I'm very excited. The method that I've been following is this Kasuya Tetsu fellow that we found on YouTube. Apparently by brewing with a very specific ratio and making sure that the first 2 pours control the acidity and the sweetness of the coffee, hopefully the rest of the coffee will follow suit. Hopefully it actually tastes nice. That tastes like someone made it for me in a cafe, but it tastes like it was done exactly how I wanted them to do it. You don't usually give people instructions when you go to a cafe, but it almost feels like I've been transported to a cafe somewhere, and before they made the coffee, I said, can you bring out a little bit more of the chocolate flavor in it, but also give it that just roasted feel, but not overly roasted. I don't want to taste the roast, I want to taste the coffee and the chocolate, and I want to feel like it had been in the sun, roasting in the sun. Obviously, that's not how they roast the beans. So getting back to the topic of subscriptions, as you can see, I'm a little bit conflicted because on the one hand, yes, I feel like we should all have access to everything for the sake of preservation. But on the other hand, I feel like, what does it do to us as individuals where we're always encouraged to feel like we need to have access to everything? I don't know exactly where it comes from. Like maybe if it were scarce and there were like limited amounts of it, maybe I could understand wanting to always have as much as possible. And like when sugar was a scarce thing, it made sense that the human body developed this desire to have sugar as much as possible. Don't let it go to waste. I've got to have all that sugar. I've got to have more and more. Because of how the human has evolved, when we see sugar, we want to have as much of it as possible. But now that it's not actually a scarce product and we have an abundance of it, it's too easy to have too much of it. And so yes, it's important to preserve video games, just like it's important to preserve music and all the things that are out there that are intellectual property. At the same time, if you go too far and the point isn't to preserve it to make sure that everyone has access to it, it becomes this poisonous feeling that if you don't have everything, you have nothing. And what I've really discovered from, reading books about, self-improvement and finance really recently is that it's not about having what everyone else has. It's not about thinking about what is out there and how much of it do I not have. It's very much like that proverb, is the glass half full or is it half empty? At the moment, I've got a cup of coffee and it's a little bit more than half full. Honestly, that really helps you think about these things. No, I don't have access to every game out there, but look at all the games that I do have. And so on the one hand, it makes total sense to have access to every game out there. If it really were just free and it didn't cost anyone anything to make, then yeah, just having a system where you could access every game all the time would be like beautiful in a sort of utopian way. But imagine if we really did have access to every game out there. It would just be boring. You wouldn't know which games to play. You wouldn't feel like you had really invested in anything. And again, maybe that is the future. Maybe it's fine. Maybe we'll find this balance where we can access everything, but we can still feel like, okay, the amount of resources that we have to spend on this isn't our money, it's our time. I'm going to allocate this much time to this game and this much time to this game. What I'd like to see not really is a restriction in the access to the games that we can get on subscription services. What I'd like to see more is promotion of the idea that we intentionally spend on certain games. So for example, before the month begins, instead of saying, okay, you will have another month of access to the entire Game Pass catalog, wouldn't it be nice, I feel like conceptually for my mind and mental state, if before the month began, I got an email that said, choose the 10 games that you'd like to play this month. And then I would just choose the 10 games. I'd be like, well, I want to continue playing Street Fighter, so I need that. I want to continue playing Under Night, so I need that. The other games, well, 8 games. If I can only play 8 games this month, I think I want them to be, I don't know, Jedi Fallen Order, because I've always been looking at the game, but I've never got around to actually playing it. I'd like to play Baldur's Gate 3. If I were to choose at the beginning of the month, or rather, if I were forced to choose at the beginning of the month, I might actually play those games. But ultimately, what I do now is I look at my Steam library. I'm like, well, I have an enormous wealth of games that I've accumulated from various Steam sales, and yeah, I could play this one, but I feel like I'm just going to play my regular games again. Because I'm not invested in them, because they were so cheap when I bought them. Like, a lot of them were like 50 cents per game when I got them. I'm like, yeah, but, I got it because it was cheap, not because I wanted to spend time on it. And actually, especially after you've got a full-time job, or like me, if you've got a kid to take care of, when you do actually have an hour free, or 30 minutes free, or 2 hours free in a day to finally play some games, you're like, wow, if I don't choose my game correctly, then I'm going to regret it tomorrow, because by the end of the week, I'll be like, okay, now I've got no time to actually play any games at all, and all I did was just continue. I just went on ranked mode, and I played another fighting game again, and yeah, I am proud of the progress that I made in the fighting game, but it's like, there's still so many games that I know that I want to play. That feeling doesn't just come from the fact that the games are out there and they're good, but the fact that I have access to them just makes me feel bad about the fact that I'm not playing them. Just like I used to say, like, I've actually done a water break. I used to call the series Water Break, where I would just talk and not drink coffee. I was talking about surrounding yourself with the things that you don't use. When you buy things that you want to use or get into, for example, a guitar, just the fact that it sits there makes me feel pretty bad every day. The fact that I can see it, it's like it's laughing at me and going, ha ha ha. Another day has gone by where you did not master me and didn't get better at music. And I'm like, I know, and I feel bad that I didn't get better at music. Then it goes on to, music itself. It's like, oh yeah, I've realized there's so many operas that I haven't listened to, or there's so many symphonies that I don't know about. There's so many composers I haven't discovered. And then I open up my Steam library. I'm like, oh, there's so many fantastic indie games that I haven't tried yet. And then I will try like 1 or 2 indie games and I'll be like, oh man, they're so good. Oh my God, if there are hundreds and thousands of other indie games like this, think of everything I'm missing out on. It's just FOMO, just constant feeling of missing out. So the answer is obviously not. We should be restricted on the number of games that we could play. Obviously, I don't want to continue letting companies just charge us loads of money and then giving us less and less and less. That's not what this discussion is about. What we need to do now that we have digital distribution, and there really is very little cost associated with giving access to games to a large number of people, we can go down the route where we do have better video game preservation. We do increase access to everyone, just like we needed to increase access to books and education to people. That's why we have libraries. All of that stuff is seriously important, but I feel like the next step is to come back to me, us, focusing on how is this actually affecting me as a human, mentally, as a person who has things to do in the world and contributions to make to my community. How often can I afford really to feel like, oh man, if only I could be playing more games? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with playing games, and I think in moderation, everyone should have access and the ability to try out playing video games. They're fantastic. That's what this whole channel is about video games. But I do recognize that I'm spending a large amount of time looking at Steam libraries and game passes and thinking, oh man, I wish I had more time to spend on this game. I wish I had more time to spend on that game. But then I go down the path in my mind of what that would actually look like. And it's like, okay, let's say that I actually did dedicate my time to playing, 70 to 100 hours of Baldur's Gate 3. And then I spent maybe 20 to 25 hours playing Final Fantasy 16. And then I spent, 2 hours a day grinding ranked mode and fighting games in, Under Night in Birth. Like, how many hours does that come to at the end of the week? Realistically, we don't actually have all that much time, and something that we're not really taught or trained anymore is how to spend our resources wisely, which is ironic because one of the key things that you should be building as a skill when you play video games is resource management. I can't think of really any video game that isn't resource management. Even Tetris, like your resources are the bricks. How are you going to manage those resources? When you're playing a fighting game, your resources are your gauges. Your HP gauge, your power gauge, your super gauge. All these things build up, and you have to use them wisely in order to win the match. It so often comes down to resource management, and it's just ironic that we don't really know how to manage our time, which is like the only actual resource that we have, which is completely finite. We know that it is the thing that is going to run out. The thing that probably has happened as a result of just the way that society is built is that we're only taught to focus on money as our finite resource, and the fact that we could have more of it if only we worked harder. Now, where do you think that concept comes from? I'm not going to get political and start trying to spread any kind of weird message like, oh, the government is trying to make you work harder. But when you think about it in terms of just basic standard economics, the government would not very much like it if we were all sitting around playing video games. They want us to work more, right? And so they show us like, here is a finite resource that you have. You're going to have a certain amount of it because there's a minimum wage. But if you want to play more games, you want to listen to more music, if you want to drink more coffee, if you want to have more and more of the stuff that we're making you feel like you're missing out if you don't have it, then you need to get more of that resource that you covet so much, which is money. But we never talk about time. We never talk about the finite resource that you have, which is time. And the only way we can really talk about it and like advertise it in a way to people is you could get your time back if you did this instead. If you worked in this career instead. If you bought this product instead. You could optimize your life so you could have more and more of that time. But really, the chasing of having more time makes no sense when you think about it, because you really don't have more time. All you're doing is allocating time away from things that you don't want to do to things that you think that you want to do. I just think that we could afford to have better education and training as we grow up on that specific resource, because ultimately it's far more valuable and rare than money. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that subscription services, I don't think they're really poisonous because of the money they drain out of you. You can always just choose to not have the subscription. You could always just choose to reduce your subscriptions. At the moment, there is still a way that you can purchase games without subscriptions. You can still buy them one by one, but that might change in the future. Free to play is a thing. Subscriptions are a thing. It becomes easier and easier to have access to everything. But how does that actually affect us as people? We're constantly being made to feel like we need to have access to everything. If we don't have access to everything, then we kind of have nothing. And then it's actually becoming easier and easier to give everyone everything. Thanks to digital distribution, it really does not cost that much unless you're running on like a server-based system. It does not cost that much to give a copy of something, a game, to a person. But the more we want to have everything, and the more that it becomes possible to have everything, the more stress that we all feel as people to spend our most valuable resource on something that we didn't intentionally decide that we wanted to spend our time on. So I'm not going to end this all on complete doom and gloom. It's not like subscription services, not only are they taking your money, but they're also taking your time, and they're also forcing you to make you feel like you need to have everything. It's all over, everything's terrible. I don't feel like that's the case at all. At the moment, we don't live in a society where we're actually plugged into the computer. They don't actually fully control us. We can unplug. I'm not saying that you have to move away from video games and never play them anymore. You should play all the games that you want. But I do think that it's important to be intentional with the way that you spend your time on your games. Stop thinking about games as this world of things that I have to experience everything of. Because if you were to dedicate your time to maybe the 6 or 7 video games that are really popping this month, what are you actually missing out on in your life by playing those games? I'm not saying that those games are not valuable, and it would be amazing if you could play all the video games out there. Which friends did you neglect to hang out with? How much time did you not spend with your family? How much time did you avoid reading books? How much time did you avoid furthering your hobbies and getting better at the things you want to do? Video games are fantastic, but they're so powerful. And video games have this amazing way of making themselves look like they're more important than all the other things that you're doing, just because there's so many of them, and that you can't ever keep up with the Game Pass. You can't ever keep up with your backlog. But if you were to just not subscribe, not have a massive library, and you were to imagine yourself with nothing, and then you just look at your time first, this is the resource that I have. I would like to allocate each month 10% of my time to playing games. I'd like to allocate 50% of my time to playing games. With the other 50%, what can I actually do? Well, 30% of that I need to do my job. 10% of that I need to organize and maintain my life. I need to clean my house, clean my room. I need to edit videos, all that other extra stuff. And then you go, oh, wow, I don't have enough time to do stuff like hang out with my family, meet my friends, read books, draw pictures, write music, practice the guitar. All those things that I had told myself that I thought was important. Then I need to go back to the allocation, and I need to go, okay, maybe 50% of my time on video games was a little bit optimistic. And it's not that I have to reduce it. I could make it work. I could make a 50% split between video gaming and the rest of my life work if I really wanted to. But am I prepared to? Maybe if I already know that it's not going to work out, maybe if I allocate 35%, let's say that amounts to 25 hours of video gaming this month. That's a little bit under an hour every single day. Where am I going to spend it? Well, if I want to continue getting better at fighting games, I need to allocate half of it maybe to playing some matches online. So that's like half of that gone. Maybe I've got about 25 minutes left every day to play on something. Maybe I'll play one RPG. And then you're thinking from the ground up. How much time and how much of my resources do I have to spend? And then you go up and you go, okay, I can afford to complete maybe one RPG this month. And then you realize I don't need a subscription. I only really have time to play a couple games that I already own. And on top of that, one game that I don't own. Maybe I'll just buy that game. Or at that point, you might decide it's still cheaper to get the subscription. But then you're not getting the subscription automatically because I need to have access to every single game all the time. What you're thinking is, okay, well, I have time to play one RPG and complete it this month. I'm going to get the subscription so I can play the game for $5 instead of having to pay $60 for the game. It's not the subscription that's evil. It's not even the fact that games being available widely is a problem. In fact, like we've talked about preservation, that's a big deal. It's very important that we continue to develop technologies that can help us preserve video games for the future. But something that is being completely forgotten is, how is this affecting us as individuals? If you ask me, I think it's time to regain control and take that power back from the video games themselves. I'm not even talking about the companies, just taking the power back from video games themselves and going, hey, actually, I appreciate that there's a large amount of you and some of you is amazing, but I don't have to experience all of you. In fact, I only really have time to experience one of you or maybe two of you this month. And that's why I'm going to continue to pay a subscription so that I can access that thing. Not because if I don't have a subscription every month, what if I can't play such and such game on such and such day? Like, I might really want to play it on that at that time, that specific game. Video games are all about resource management, so isn't it ironic that we don't know how to manage our most valuable finite resource? Time. Listen, this is one of my favorite things to do, is sit down with a cup of coffee and just chill out with you guys and talk about topics that I think don't get enough focus. And today's one was that, yeah, we talk about the toxicity and poison of subscription services and how that affects us and how the big companies are trying to take all of our money. But what's really going on is, like, what are they taking away from us truly? You know, the power, the feelings, the mental stability of being able to spend my time on the things that I want to do. I think these are things that don't get discussed enough, and I'm just really grateful to you for sharing this time with me today. If you want to see more of this type of video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Check out this video next. I'm sure you're going to absolutely love it. If you love coffee and if you love video games, make sure to like the video, comment below. I've had a great time with you today. I'll see you real soon.